I'm Matt, I'm head of nutrition at Virgin Active. We have the lovely Hannah here, registered nutritionist, international athlete, and we're going to focus on all things nutrition and the menstrual cycle today. It's going to be a fantastic conversation, so stick around, leave your comments, and we will answer your questions at the end as well. So it's so good to have you here. Hannah, how did you get into this area?
Yeah, well, like I said, I kind of fell into it. It was never something that I set out to do when I went to uni. But when I started to work more one-to-one with clients and go more the performance nutrition route, the more I started to work with female athletes and the more hypothalamic amenorrhea would come up, which is when you lose your period through like stress, basically, whether that's underfueling, overtraining, and we'll come into all of this, I'm sure, throughout this whole live. But that's when I noticed that there was such a lack of knowledge. And being an athlete myself, I not only see it in my teammates, but something I've experienced myself and had no awareness of what it was called, that I even had HA or Red S, or no one ever spoke about it really. And there's not a lot of education. So when I saw such a gap, I was like, someone needs to wave the period flag here and talk about them out loud. What's normal, what's not normal, how to get it back, not to panic, the fact that it's reversible. All these things. So because it was something I went through and I saw everywhere because of the field that I'm in, I became so passionate about it and excited about talking about menstrual cycles, which like when at school, when we talk about menstrual cycles, you're shown one graph and it's, the maturation of an egg and the uterus lining thickening. And it's all about having a baby, but it's nothing about how you can adapt your lifestyle to your menstrual cycle, how it can really alleviate a lot of the pressures around how you're feeling, about how fatigued you are. And you really understand your body and how it works when you can work with your menstrual cycle. And we're not taught that element about the female body. So that's, again, why I just love talking about it and sharing all this information.
Yeah, and in terms of, improving energy levels, well-being, supporting symptoms, we know there's that cross-section with nutrition, which we'll obviously get to. But I think if we just set the scene around the menstrual cycle, and I know you're so passionate communicating it, like you said, we want to move on from that dull perception of it. People are taught at school, you're probably watching this, there's so much more information out there. So it's about communicating the phases in a certain way, when someone can eat certain things and train in a certain way. We'll get into that as well, so please leave your questions. So if we kind of start of a bit of an overview on the menstrual cycle side of things, then just like take the viewers kind of into that.
Yeah, well, it's so cool. And the body is so clever, the way that the menstrual cycle works and how we change our cycle. And it's really important to track your cycle, ladies, if you're not already doing this, because it tells you so much about yourself. And, men have a 24-hour cycle. Environmental, external stimulus gone, you technically could wake up the same every day. Women, no 2 days are the same. Hormone levels change every single day. So really understanding where you're at in your cycle is so key to adapting everything. So I really like the analogy of looking at your menstrual cycle like seasons. And it's also something you can communicate with your partner, because if you say to your partner, I'm a luteal phase, don't talk to me, whatever, it doesn't really resonate. They don't get it really.
It's hard to understand.
Exactly. And if you didn't pay attention in that one biology class, then how are you ever going to know? So the seasons is a really nice way of looking at it. Typically day 1 to 7, everyone ranges differently with how long their periods last. And winter, as you would in this season, is a time to kind of maybe hibernate a little bit. You don't socialize so much, you kind of stay in, not feeling like crazy you want to go socialize because we're in winter. And then we kind of transition into spring, and that's as our hormones start to rise. We get a bit more estrogen, a bit more LH and FSH, and that's what makes us feel good. And in spring, like we do with our seasons, we start to feel a bit better. Maybe we're going to go out and socialize a bit more with our rising hormones. Then from spring we transition into summer. Party. We love summer. Our estrogen is at our highest, LH is at its highest, and this is when we're ovulating. And if we think from I love to think about hunter-gatherer perspectives, and I'm a bit of stoic like that. When we ovulate, that's obviously when we're most fertile. So estrogen makes us feel amazing. It makes us want to go socialize. We're better at networking. We appear more attractive to potential mates because our body is like, get pregnant, because we're here for 2 reasons: to survive and procreate, technically, if we're thinking about our little cavemen. So that is the best time to maybe plan in, networking events and presentations or nights out with the girls.
So like more output, more energy. Okay.
Yeah, and this can tie into training as well, which we can touch on.
Yeah.
But it's typically when we feel our best. So we're ovulating, we're in summer. And then we transition into autumn. And this is where we see the drop off of that estrogen, which makes us feel really good. So we might feel a bit lower because of that drop off, but also progesterone enters the chat.
Okay.
Progesterone makes us want to slow down a bit.
Right.
And it's really clever. So it's not just, oh, I'm in my luteal phase. So I didn't mention then, but that period from winter to summer is follicular phase.
Mm-hmm.
You can remember it as like your first phase, follicular.
Mm-hmm.
And then the luteal phase is the last phase.
Okay.
So this is where we transition into autumn. And progesterone is really clever because it makes us want to slow down, and it's hoping that we've conceived a child, that we're pregnant. So it makes you want to stay in, and you don't need to go out and find a mate, and you better protect that potential baby. So it makes you slow down. It can have a bit of a depressive effect where it can impact your mood, just so you stay in really. But it can also impact digestion in a way that it delays your transit time and your gut, and it can make you feel a bit constipated because it wants you to extract as many nutrients from the food to take it to the potential baby that you're harvesting.
Ah, interesting. So if people are starting to feel like their gut health's changing a little bit, bowel movements changing a little bit, energy levels, maybe not wanting to socialize as much. Yeah. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Because we've hopefully found a mate and now we need to protect.
Right.
And so then, there's a lot of changes in that luteal phase. And this is the classic PMS symptoms where everyone will feel like bloated, fatigued, tender boobs, irritability, poor digestion, the classic acne and all that.
Okay. So obviously you've come out with a lot of names of hormones and things like that for people watching, a lot of women watching and things as well. They don't necessarily have to learn all of these and understand them. But in terms of like tracking phases and how someone starts to be in touch with their body a little bit more, maybe we just explore that a little bit. So if people are watching and they're new to all of this information, the seasonal side of things is great and people can start thinking about that and using that. But if we move that a step further, how do people start to identify these things, work with their own body? We'll then bring in the intersection of nutrition and key nutrients in each phase in a bit. But I suppose with that knowledge, then, what are the next steps for a lot of women watching this?
To kind of know where you're at in your cycle.
Yeah, little bits like that. Is it app related, or is it, do you keep a bit of a symptom diary yourself? Or, obviously you coach a lot of women, most days either in person or online. What do you recommend from that side of things?
So I definitely think apps are amazing because they have all the different types of symptoms. You can say when your period starts, when the period ends, and it can start to predict when your cycle's going to be. And you should be fairly regular. It doesn't have to be bang on, and it's not going to be bang on 28 days either. It's like a magical cycle that no one has. It can be like 21 to 35 days, depending on what your normal is. So the only thing to watch out there is when your normal changes. So we'll come on to that. But typically speaking, apps are really helpful. The symptoms that we spoke about in that like luteal phase are really good indicators of where you're at. But also cervical mucus changes are so important. And it's something we don't talk about.
Yeah, so that's something I think about probably.
Yeah, probably
most
not.
days.
It's something that I think about all the time now.
Okay.
It's so interesting what it can tell you.
Sure.
And you have to think, there's not a lot of ways in your body where you can tell if you're stressed or overworked or whatever, because you can't really see it. But your menstrual cycle, your changes in cervical mucus are things that you can see, and it tells you how your body is responding to whatever lifestyle factors have happened in that month leading up to it.
Interesting. So it's a real pulse of your well-being state at a time rather than an inconvenience.
It's a vital sign of health.
Okay.
So you want a healthy menstrual cycle.
Right.
So to also kind of know where you're at in your cycle, cervical mucus, and I can talk through how it's going to change in the cycle. Yeah. So obviously you'll have your period, your bleed, 3 to 7 days can be quite normal. And then after that, it's going to be just like normal, white, quite dry. And then it's going to be increasing up until that day 14 ovulation, up until summer. And then when we get to summer, that day 14 ovulation, it'll be around day 14, it's going to change. And to know that you've ovulated, because you don't always ovulate in cycles, especially if you're really athletic. Sometimes you can have anovulatory cycles where you don't release the egg. Right. So you can still have a bleed, and that's where it can be a bit confusing.
Okay.
So to make sure that you've ovulated, you want that cervical mucus to be like a raw egg white consistency. So sorry if I've ruined eggs for anyone. But it's a really good indicator. It wants to be kind of like slippery, clear, and again, it's really clever. it's another way of ensuring that the sperm is going to travel well, that when you have sex, that it feels better, that it doesn't hurt, that you're more likely to.
Okay, and that's an indicator as well. Right.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly. Libido is a massive thing I talk about with my clients. And it's, again, something we don't talk about.
Yeah.
Because estrogen increases that libido around the time you're ovulating.
So sex drive, feeling confident,
exactly,
with your partner or, whoever else you're interacting with.
And a lot of my clients that have had low hormones for years and years and years will think they're like asexual, or that that's just not them.
Wow.
When actually it's an innate drive.
Right.
So if you're not having those shifts in libido throughout your cycle, again, it's an indicator that...
Real pulse of your well-being again.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So shall we just discuss a little bit around some of the nutrients,
yes,
and how they interact? There's obviously people watching this, they're going to have preferences around food. Eating's a learned behavior. They're going to have their favorites. They're going to have things around them in their food environment. And I think we can really bust the myths around you should eat this, you shouldn't eat this, no dairy, no fat, all these kind of things we were talking about and planning in these areas. But I suppose if we keep with some of the analogy around the seasons, energy levels, like you said there, around the mucus, and you also talked about someone's sex drive and how they're feeling. You don't have to necessarily use apps. You can if you want. But then if people are thinking about what they're eating and what they're preparing at certain times of the month, then hopefully we can show a bit of value there and give people a few action points and a few things to take away. So what are some of the common or most bang for the buck nutrients that you cover with your clients that you think the audience would be interested to understand? Yeah.
I think before kind of delving into the more vitamins and minerals perspective, if you think of like the pyramid of importance, like the food
of course,
pyramids,
the
bottom of the pyramid, which is like the most important bit, is the biggest part, is energy intake, making sure you have enough energy in. So with my clients that don't have a period, we will look first at energy intake and macronutrients. So like the big building blocks first.
So the total amount of food you're consuming roughly on a daily basis. Perfect.
Yeah. And is it matching the expenditure, but also is there enough left over for your body, which is a term, energy availability, which we will touch on when we come on to missing periods. So that those and macronutrients, so a sufficient carb intake, which tend to be low in women anyway, due to kind of, the trendy diets and whatever, and fat intake, so that's a really important for hormone production. So when I talk about all the nutrients within the cycle, we're assuming that all of those bases are covered first.
Cool.
Because nutrients and supplements and anything like that tend to go at the tip of the pyramid, are negligible if you haven't got enough energy coming in.
And when we're talking about carbohydrates, you're talking about starchy carbohydrates, veg that grow below the ground, things like that. Give people a bit of a kind of overview from a carbohydrate point of view. And obviously watching this, you can choose the ones you like, things that are easy to prepare, things that you can buy on the go, at work, at home, all that kind of thing. Yeah,
for sure. There's definitely, the starchy carbohydrates and the ones that come from veg, but also a lot of the athletes and the active women that I work with, we focus a lot on like ultra processed foods, like carbohydrates that come from juices or squares bars, or, that's a little tag. Sponsor me. Anything like that, any like cereal bars, like foods that often are fear foods for a lot of clients I work with, are great sources of carbohydrates without having to increase a massive volume on your plate. So like we can definitely touch on why those types of carbohydrates are important too.
Yes.
And like the healthy diet isn't the diet that only eats healthy food. It's the one that encompasses everything, that doesn't have anxieties and food around fears, that does include ultra processed food where it's necessary.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you can't have whole foods before a run because it's not going to digest quick enough. So you won't even use it as fuel. You need that quick to digest carbohydrate. So all carbohydrates are friends when we talk about carbs.
And then it's interesting, people watching this might have cravings around certain types of carbohydrate rich foods, self-destructive thoughts. Why can't I put this down? I'm constantly snacking. And if you are someone that has a high energy output through training, and obviously if you're training in our clubs and things like that as well, you exercise a lot, you enjoy it, you like it from the endorphin side of things, we're trying to top up this total amount of intake, aren't we, to reduce the gap. So that whole energy availability around, if your output is up here and you're not quite consuming enough, as we'll go on to later, that can start to change things, obviously from a cycle point of view, from an energy level point of view. During these phases, how can the carbohydrate utilization, or a female's cravings or things like that, how does that fluctuate?
So typically women are better at fat mobilize or utilizing fats as energy better. So that's why it's not a good idea to reduce carbs, even though we do utilize fats better, because we need the carbs for that immediate energy and that sustained energy. So low carb diets really don't work well for women.
Okay.
And especially when we come into that luteal phase, that autumn, because things like blood glucose regulation isn't as good as it is in like the rest of the cycle. So if you further reduce carbohydrates when that's already a bit impaired in that cycle, it's not great for energy levels, for mood levels, for digestion, for anything like that. And particularly when we think about fasted training, where we for any type of exercise, we need carbohydrate availability. And when we talk about energy availability, missing periods, and all those types of things, carb availability ties into that. Because it's not just increasing energy intake through like protein intake, because we don't utilize that well as energy. We need usable forms of energy, which come from glucose.
Cool.
So if we kind of transition into that phase and start to do more fasted training, we exacerbate the issue of poor blood glucose regulation. Especially if you're athletic, you exacerbate the issue of low energy availability.
Sure.
So, and if you do fasted training, not that I'm a big advocate for it anyway, but it wouldn't be something to do every single day either.
No.
It would, that whole train low.
Compete high.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's not something that you would do every single day. It might be like 2 sessions a week you would do that. Whereas that isn't translated well into recreational athletes. Elite athletes might have all the resources to do that well. Whereas recreational athletes don't always know that. You'll just hear train low and then we'll do that for most sessions. But yeah, especially in that autumn phase, it's just not conducive to a good cycle.
So would that be saying if you had morning training session, you increase carbohydrate intake maybe in the evenings to top up, and then if you can, you're building your body's ability, your gut and things, to have small amounts of carbohydrates first thing in the morning. Obviously people might have work early or might try and train early. They're not going to necessarily have time potentially for a large breakfast, but we can work around these things, can't we, with textures, changing portions, practicing drinking or eating things before early training sessions, and then like you said, at key times during the cycle, fueling for the work required is massively important, and the carbohydrate intake needs to be a big chunk of your total amount of calories. What are kind of some of the strategies to help with the fueling side of things if people are watching this and they are exercising early and things?
I love this question. So I'm a big advocate for always having 3 feeding opportunities before training. In the mornings, it's a bit more difficult, but I'll talk about how to kind of come around that. Typically speaking, before training, you want your pre-training meal, which is going to be about like half the plate carbohydrate, and then a quarter protein, a quarter fruit and veg, and about 3 to 4 hours before training. So it's enough time to digest. That carb might be more of like a white carb, like white rice or white pasta, because we don't need a lot of fiber before we train, because fiber stays in our gut a long time. We don't want that going into training. We want that for dinner after training, but it's not helpful before because it's not going to get digested quick enough. The next feeding opportunity comes about 1 to 2 hours before training, and that is going to be a substantial snack. And that is something more like a white bagel with peanut butter and banana, or like yogurt and granola. And that is like a top up in that it will keep you from being hungry during training, especially if you're competing. It's really off-putting if you're hungry. But it also just allows that extra top up of glycogen in your muscles and liver before training. And then the last one is about 30 minutes before. I call it a pre-training primer, and it primes your body for exercise. So this would be things like a gel, dried fruit, squares, bars, talking about again, cereal bars, anything that works for your guts. Again, if you don't have gels, train yourself to work with gels. Sometimes I don't disagree. Sweets, those types of things. And this primes your body because it activates your central nervous system. It tops up your blood glucose and your muscle glycogen, and it helps you basically train at higher intensity for longer and spare some of your already stored muscle glycogen for that activity. So if you're training in the morning, obviously 3 to 4 hours before work is early enough. Never mind,
not practical, is it?
Before training. So that pre-training meal moves to dinner. So you would have to have like half carbohydrates and stuff before you go to bed, making sure that you stomach well. That could be like a whole grain variety, kind of like complex carb. It doesn't have to be white by that point.
Yes.
I would still try get in the other 2.
Cool.
So about an hour before, if you can. You can also train yourself to have these substantial snacks a bit closer if you can tolerate it. but still definitely trying to get in like a bagel or granola, or like even a bowl of cereal is really good. It's demonized a bit. This is where processed foods can be really helpful, because there's not a chance you're going to get in, I don't know, like some brown bread with whatever. It's not going to digest quick enough, but something like a sugary cereal like Cocoa Pops is perfect, because you're going to utilize that immediately. And then whether it's a gel or like dried fruit or something, that 30 to 15 minutes before you go as well. So you're properly fueled, because I think the notion of exercising to lose weight is hopefully dwindling. People aren't doing it so much, and it's more about performance now. And this is the way you need to optimize performance. You've got one stimulus, which is training. The other stimulus has to be nutrition for adaptation, for performance to coincide.
So obviously this is the end where people watching this and those strategies that Hannah's mentioned, you've got high output of training, but obviously you can titrate that back. If you're someone watching this and you're exercising a bit more, the evening meal might be a great place to start to add carbohydrates in, and see what you tolerate in things before bed. And then obviously if you are starting to add more volume, more training, then the hour before, the 2 hours before, the 30-minute before, the top ups and things come, and you can really adapt your gut to be able to take in more food, different kind of textures and things like that. And then like you said, it's depending on the phase and how you're feeling and how your gut's responding, you can come up with some of those go-to foods and really break the barriers around. Just because they're labelled as ultra processed doesn't mean that you can't use them for fueling and for output and to help with overall well-being, to nourish and to meet the kind of total amount of food roughly you're trying to intake, to meet your carbohydrate recommendations. So they're the kind of real solid building blocks. What are some of the other nutrients if we further work up the pyramid a little bit, taking the menstrual cycle into consideration, and if people have started to understand the foundations, we're talking about things like iron, and we're talking about things like calcium. People can play food detective, they can look at packets, they can use apps and things if they need to, they can look at recipes and things through Instagram. What are some of the kind of key nutrients on top of carbohydrates and total calories that we can consider? So
if we work around the cycle then, so we'll start in deep dark winter, menstrual cycle, the period.
Let's go.
Because there's the menstrual bleed, then there's a higher requirement for iron, because you're losing blood. Especially for active women and normal women anyway. I think there was a statistic, it was like 1 in 4 women have low iron. And I'm not even sure what that would be for athletic women. And even women with hypothalamic amenorrhea who have lost their periods are in even greater risk. So iron is really important. So you can get this through food, whether that's red meat or dark leafy greens. With meat, that's heme iron. So that is more bioavailable than non-heme iron from plant-based sources. So if you are plant-based, really looking for fortified products, so that whether that's breakfast cereals, your milk, your yogurts, those types of things, dark leafy greens, but also increasing vitamin C intake as well during this period, because vitamin C increases iron absorption.
Yeah, kind of work together, don't it? Like a cofactor.
Exactly. Whereas you'd also want to avoid having teas and coffees around your meals, because they inhibit iron absorption. So it's kind of how can we optimize the iron intake as well as trying to eat more during this phase.
Interesting. And that's like a timing thing. So it doesn't necessarily mean you have to cut things out. You might just want to move those, those beverages that we love. Like I'm obviously a massive coffee fiend, but if I'm or if someone else is watching this is moving that away from meals, I'm going to try and maximize iron absorption. Vitamin C, things like fruits can work really well. I know you're an advocate of someone who's very active consuming orange juice, carbohydrate top up, good for vitamin C, great cofactor for iron. And again, that kind of goes against everything that's out there for that being an ultra processed food, that not being part of someone's diet. So if there's a very active, female watching this, these things, they play a role at certain times of the month, don't they?
100%. So yeah, really focusing on iron, vitamin C. Also another thing, just like squeezing lemon or citrus fruit over your meals as well is another way of just increasing vitamin C from that meal.
Okay.
There's lots of things, and people probably already have like high vitamin C fruit and vegetables, like red bell peppers, really high in vitamin C, or kiwi fruit, super high in vitamin C, and also really high in fiber if you have GI issues around the time of your period. So that's probably the main thing, and also maybe including more like omega-3, because it's very anti-inflammatory. So that would be your fish, like oily fish, like salmon, mackerel, all these types of things. And from a plant-based perspective, it would be like seeds, like chia seeds, flax seeds, or maybe like an algae-based supplement if you are completely plant-based.
Sure. And what, in terms of weekly intake, roughly, obviously everyone's different. You work with people on an individual basis, but anyone watching this, through the week, if they're trying to consume omega-3 rich foods, some through plants or some through fish, what would be the rough recommendation there for like an active, female watching this?
Guidelines for fish intake are 2 portions a week, one oily, one normal. Seeds, I would try to incorporate most days, to be honest, because they are high in nutrients. They have an antioxidant property. They are high in fiber.
Yeah. Buy in bulk, and then you can put them on things as toppers. You can mix them. You can take them as snacks.
Exactly.
Big variety. Buy the mixed versions.
And if you're someone that doesn't like the texture of seeds, I work with a lot of people that don't like seeds because they don't like chia seeds give them the ick, for example. That's what I get a lot. You can also, in like a coffee grinder or in a blender, pulse them or like blend them up so that they're a really fine powder, and then incorporate them that way. Nice. So then, you don't taste them, you don't get the ick. Yeah. You can put them on in stews, you can put them in savory meals rather than just have to have them in breakfast. So you're still getting all the nutrients in and overcoming that barrier.
And obviously when you're including these foods, our diets are obviously such a matrix. Someone might then after this say, I don't know, try a few kiwi fruits in an evening or something, to integrate some chia seeds, maybe consume a little bit more fish. I think what people might want to know, and it is tricky, but these things are going to take time. Obviously, after a week or two, you're not necessarily going to see or feel the differences. But as you start to improve the nutrient density, work on the total amount of food you're consuming, the carbohydrates around exercise, as you've mentioned, some of the healthy fats, more iron-rich foods, what are maybe some of the indicators? I know we're going to get onto the other side with REDS and HA in a bit, but how some people watching this start to see them, they may be making a bit of a difference, or things are moving in a bit of a better direction. Is it just give them time, or are you looking to do these things for 3 or 4 months? What's your experience around that?
So with any nutrition that might impact your menstrual cycle, it's not just going to work overnight. And this is what I say to my clients that lose their periods. Like, you didn't lose it from one fasted workout. You're not going to get it back from one day of eating carbohydrates. It's what you do consistently that has the impact. And that's a really uninteresting answer to a lot of people, because they're like, I want to see it straight away. But like, what you eat, if you have a normal cycle, what you eat now might have an impact in like 3 cycles time.
Interesting.
So it's not just going to have an immediate impact. It is what you do the majority of the time that has that meaningful impact.
Right.
So, eating all these nutrients consistently is really important. Having carbohydrate availability consistently is really important, because your body is sensitive to stress and it wants to protect you. So that's where we'll talk about like the hypothalamus and how it responds to stress.
And we'll put some of these calculations and some of the tips and things that Hannah's mentioned. We have like a nutrition coaching page on our Virgin Active website, so we will put a PDF of some of the key points together. So any numbers we're talking about, some of the lists of foods and nutrients and things like that as well. Obviously, if you're watching this, please put in a question. We can collate those at the end, and we'll go through them.
So we'll remember this 45, but for now, we'll talk about what it means. But to be in optimal energy availability, you want 45, say. But you don't just want to be at 45. You want a buffer. You want to be above that, so that if there's a time where you are stressed at work, or you have an illness, or you're traveling, that you're not knocked into low energy availability because you've been at threshold.
Okay.
So you always want that with, carbohydrates or energy availability. You don't always want to eat just enough. You want a nice buffer with it as well.
Sure. So I think that's a nice way to dovetail into some of these lifestyle factors. So you mentioned stress. We're focusing on exercise, obviously, because a lot of you watching this, if you're using our clubs and training, the active people, the intersection between nutrition and exercise and the menstrual cycle. So maybe we cover a little bit around exercise in general and the menstrual cycle. Stress, and obviously a lot of them are going through both as well. Highly stressed, training a lot, and trying to eat well to help with symptoms. It's obviously very confusing, and there's a lot of information out online. So how do we think about exercise around the menstrual cycle, and then how does stress impact that as well? Let's address a bit of that.
So if we think about training around the menstrual cycle, there isn't solid evidence to say every woman should do this at this stage of the cycle, because everyone's so different. Okay. And women might feel stronger on their period, or might feel more fatigued on their period. And it's just quite different. So that's why tracking your cycle is really important, to know what your normal is. Typically speaking, if we think around that spring and summer when estrogen's high, we're feeling good, then we tend to have more energy. So things like higher intensity training or strength training or like longer runs, they might be good around this time because we'll have more energy to do it and we'll feel good about it. And then as we kind of go off into autumn and we feel slower, fatigued and bloated, maybe that's a time that we listen to our body and we don't push it so that we feel awful during training. Maybe it's more slower movement, more gentle movement. It could be more like zone 2 work or like Pilates and yoga, stuff that makes you feel good. And then as you go into winter when you actually are on your periods, that might be time to like completely slow down and be in tune with your body around, yoga, Pilates, lower intensity stuff.
So is that like conversation pace when you're mentioning zone 2 and things? Is that being able to, hum a tune, you're like gently sweating, your heart rate's not super elevated, and then it's not maybe feeling bad about that level of training because obviously it's still fantastic for the mind and body. A lot of it could be outdoors and things as well at times, or exploring new classes, like you said, from a movement point of view. And then that can change and you can titrate things up to more higher intensity. Then that's when you're utilizing some more of the carbohydrate rich foods like you mentioned before. So this milieu can kind of come into a bit more structure, but then obviously you're learning about what's best for you compared to a friend or compared to what, some articles said about how you should train.
Yeah. And I think the important thing to remember is that there's no time on your menstrual cycle where you can't do something, where like say if you're competing and you're in autumn, it's not that your performance is going to be awful. It's just the only thing that will impact is how you're feeling and the fatigue and things like that. And some people actually really might not struggle with PMS symptoms. Some people might really struggle with it. And it's the same with like your menstrual flow. If it's heavy, that's really off-putting when you're competing. And there was a lot of talk around it, like with gymnastics, for example. So it's, it's to remember that it's not like, oh God, I'm going to be rubbish. It's like you might just feel a bit rubbish compared to a few weeks before that.
Okay.
But you can absolutely still do everything. But it's like you said, to give yourself a break, and it's okay. You don't have to do it. If you're not in a training cycle and you don't have something you have to work towards, if you're just like a recreational athlete, it's okay to slow down. And actually, if you allow yourself that periodization with your menstrual cycle, then you become more in tune with your body. You have natural times where you deload and you load. And the issue I see with a lot of my clients is that they kind of compare themselves to elite athletes at their time of competition, where they're training all the time, they are like really high intensity. But athletes don't train like that all year round. They have off season, they periodize their training, they have deload weeks.
Recovery massive.
Recovery is huge. But as recreational athletes, without resources to that knowledge and the timetables and whatever, they maintain their training all year round.
Right.
And there's never a deload week and there's never off season and all these types of things. So when you kind of train with your menstrual cycle, you naturally have deload weeks.
Interesting.
So it can tie really nicely into training adaptation and avoiding training plateaus and allowing your body time to recover.
Yeah. So, and then before we move into the side of things where things might not be quite right with training, you might get it a little bit wrong. The red side of things, the HA side of things, for a broader audience, just touching on the PMS side, symptoms, and then in your experience, a few of the things that you might consider from a nutrition point of view. I think these kind of longer form conversations, they open up to coaches like Hannah who work with people like yourself watching this, and you might only change one or two things. It's not a complete new diet. It's not foods and superfoods that you've never heard of that you have to spend tons of money on. You're talking about real food changes at certain times in the month and being aware of certain symptoms. So maybe just, cover the PMS side of things briefly before we touch on reds and some of the nutrient dense foods that you might consider. Yeah.
So PMS symptoms, it's normal to have some to an extent. It's not normal to have awful ones.
Okay.
So that's another thing. And that's maybe going more into like medical realms, which, my boundaries, don't work within the medical side of things, but it's important to kind of recognize what is normal and maybe what needs further investigation. So typical PMS symptoms are bloating, fatigue, acne, sore boobs, headaches, dizziness, all these types of things. You can manage them to an extent. So things like potentially around this phase, magnesium can help alleviate mood disturbances and maybe cramps as well.
Interesting.
Omega-3 can potentially be quite helpful with alleviating cramps 2.
The anti-inflammatory side of things as well, isn't
The
it?
anti-inflammatory side,
Right.
yeah. So a high antioxidant intake around this time. So that'd be like fruit and vegetables as well, because the
Right.
body's a bit more inflamed during this
Yeah.
stage of the cycle. So
So those kind of powerful plant chemicals, lots of colour.
exactly.
Frozen foods and things still fine, fresh, obviously,
Absolutely.
ideally.
Yeah,
Interesting.
the more colour the better, because you
Yeah.
know I can speak about eating the rainbow with every age group. But yeah, the different colours do different things in the
Cool.
body. They're different properties, so it's important to get the array.
Right. Magnesium-rich foods, maybe just mention a few of those.
Yeah, so like dark chocolate, you'll love that.
Mm-hmm.
Nuts, but also like spinach, quinoa,
Mm-hmm.
beans,
Mhm.
chickpeas, those types of things.
Mm-hmm.
All really good.
Cool. So yeah, so we've covered a few more of the nutrients. So magnesium side of things, something to look into. We've gone through carbohydrates. We've gone through total calories and things as well. This final section, we're going to basically just address something called Red S and HA, and then we'll take some questions.
Okay.
So pop in the questions, and we'll answer as many as we can. So yeah, what is Red S?
See me sit up when I'm going to talk about this.
Here we go.
So REDS is a model that you can use, and it's called Relative Energy Deficiency in Sport.
Mm-hmm.
And what underpins REDS is low energy availability, which we've touched on. So low energy availability is when so it's more nuanced than energy balance. It is how much energy is left over for your body after exercise. So it's not just matching energy intake and expenditure. It's how much is left over for your body to function as well. And the 45 is 45 calories per kilogram of fat-free mass. So every kilogram of fat-free mass in your body needs 45 calories at least from the food you're eating to do its normal functioning.
Wow.
So when the body is not happy that there's not enough energy for it to do its thing, it panics. And if you think back to like hunter-gatherer times, it's a survival mechanism. So our body is going to prioritize where the energy goes to survive. And it's going to be like your brain, lungs, hearts, anything that's going to keep you alive. It's not going to be things like the menstrual cycle, because we can live without it. It's really energy expensive to have a menstrual cycle, and if there's not enough food to feed one mouth, there's not enough food to feed another. Things like thermoregulation, so feeling cold all the time. A classic symptom is cold hands, cold feet, because circulation just is disrupted. It's not enough energy to really prioritize it. Digestion as well, it might feel a bit clunky. So a lot of my clients will be like, I have IBS.
Okay.
But actually, once we get them into energy availability, those symptoms seem to, make themselves fine again. So it's really where the body prioritizes the energy, and movement is essential for survival.
Okay.
If there's a famine, if you think hunter-gatherer times, you've got to move to find food, but also if there's a tiger, all of a sudden you have to run from it. So that's why a lot of people can run a marathon, but they, have no periods, because it's gone towards movement and it's not being prioritized elsewhere. So REDS kind of brings all of this together in a nice model. It's related to sport, but actually they can relate to anyone.
Yeah, anyone who's quite active and, like you said, not quite bridging that gap between the difference in how much you're burning in terms of calories.
Exactly. So there's kind of two sides to it. There's the physiological consequences of low energy availability, and then there's the performance side. Okay. So anyone can have the physiological consequences, and then the performance ones, that's where the low energy availability impacts performance, performance like endurance, performance, strength and power, training plateaus. This is something that I really experienced. I'm like a fast sprinter, and I was so slow one season, and I had no idea what was going on. What's that?
So that was the gap. You just weren't quite nourishing enough and getting enough calories in, carbohydrates in.
Exactly. And I said earlier,
so it affects your speed.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. Your power output, endurance output.
Okay.
So it doesn't matter how much training you do, you can't get better. Recovery, impacts your recovery, you just don't recover. A classic thing is like you could maybe go and do your training, but you cannot climb the stairs out of the tube. Like you're so tired.
Wow.
And it's not normal to be so tired in every other aspect of your life apart from training. Wow. You can have it all, where you have time for everything, like energy for everything. So the physiological consequences would be things like hormonal changes, loss of a menstrual cycle, loss of bone mineral density, so increased risk of stress fracture, early onset osteoporosis. Estrogen is really important for supporting your bone health.
Wow, it's injuries.
Immune function, so always having like upper respiratory tract infections like colds, coughs, flus.
Like the 100-day cough that you just can't shake.
Exactly.
Okay.
And always like recurrent ones as well, but also recurrent injuries. So you're never a big injury, but always something. And that was another thing that I had. Like,
That
oh my
might
God,
be
I'm just injury prone. But
an
actually,
energy availability thing.
recovering well, yeah.
Wow. Okay. So yeah, that's obviously it's a snapshot. It's a bit of an overview, but I think if we have some questions, then this is a perfect time to go through some because we can personalize some of the some of the bits of information. Daily meals for each one of the cycle phases. Okay, that's putting you on the spot. So yeah, can we get an example of daily meals for each one of the cycle phases? Well, obviously that comes into preferences.
Yeah.
What people have available. Going through each cycle, obviously there's quite a lot of information there, but maybe you could give us a couple of key examples in your experience. You coach a lot of people, so it's something that you can maybe draw on.
So we'll go through phases. Winter, this is where we might want to include more like red meat or like lean sources of protein to make sure we're getting that iron level in, and maybe with like red bell pepper and rice, for example. I'm no chef, so these aren't going to be exciting meals.
Yeah, but it brings the knowledge into like practical understanding, and people can choose their favorite foods and things from there. So yeah, that's great.
Something like that. And we go into that spring, summer follicular phase. We do want a high carbohydrate in this phase too, because carbohydrate availability is really important for ovulation, because there's a lot of energy required for that. So, pasta with a lean source of protein and maybe some healthy fats in there because hormones are rising. So this might be where we have more like avocados and seeds and fish as well, because fatty acids are really important for hormone production as we kind of come into that phase. And then we go into autumn. And we didn't talk about cravings, but this is where you actually should really honor some of your cravings. Your basal metabolic rate increases during this phase. You're hungrier, and that's okay. You could take an extra like 200, 300 calories in this time. So to kind of honor the cravings, because if you ignore them, you're going to have, that yogurt, that cereal bar, that other thing, and then the chocolate bar anyway. Right, so you might as well just go straight to it if you want it. So include those, but also you want to stabilize your blood sugar levels. So again, your whole grains, to help with like mood disturbances and regulate your blood sugar levels, and then lean source of protein and healthy fats too.
Yeah, so some of these snacks are okay to mix in, like you said, as long as your meals are balanced and things.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay. With the negative impact on absorption of iron, how long after a meal should someone then have tea or coffee?
Yeah.
That's a great question.
I typically say like an hour. I mean, it could probably be 30 minutes to an hour.
Yeah, perfect.
I say about an hour because that probably allows enough time for it to leave your stomach and then it's already digestion.
Cool. Yeah, and it's even that concept of just thinking about separating it. It doesn't have to be perfect, but a lot of us will just have tea and coffee with meals. So the concept is, half an hour, 2 hours later, just make it work for whatever you can practically. Healthy snacks during cravings. This is a big one.
Like I said,
it can't be square bars because you've already mentioned those.
I would honor the craving first of all, so I would include it with it. Things like dark chocolate are high in magnesium, like I said. So
yeah, that's an interesting one.
Incorporating that can help with cravings of those types of foods. Has the magnesium for mood disturbances and like symptoms, and then have that alongside something healthy as well. So healthy snacks would be like yogurt with fruit and then dark chocolate, or it could be like carrot sticks, hummus, and then something else that you like, whether that's like whole grain pita or whatever. But I would include a healthy snack with the thing you really want.
Cool. Yes, there's a bit more of a meal with you in there. You have a bit of a balance of nutrients. You've got protein and fibre that can help with blood sugar regulation. I'm a massive one on portables, like you said, pitas, bagels. I think homemade sandwiches and things get a bad rap, and they can just be smaller portions, can't they? It can be main meals and just made into smaller portions. Cool. So can birth control impact the nutritional needs or phases of the menstrual cycle? Yeah, this is something we haven't obviously touched on. It's a brilliant area. So
birth control is different types. If you're maybe on like a coil, you tend to have like the same cycle, like the same fluctuations in hormones.
Okay.
So you would do kind of what we've been speaking about. Things like the oral contraceptive pill. If you think of that big cycle, I think everyone can picture the graph in their heads that were shown. It kind of is more flatlined, because you don't have the fluctuations because ovulation is suppressed. So actually you don't really have the same need for the different vitamins and mineral requirements throughout the cycle because there's not the fluctuations that you see in a normal cycle.
Okay.
So I would just and also what we recommend for the cycle is just a well-balanced diet with carbohydrates, healthy fats, vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, fibers. So I would just follow that as is. But I would also try to you know, how you would periodize with the seasons, do that for yourself anyway. So that you do have deload weeks and you do have time where you can be a bit more introverted and you don't have to show up every day the same. You can have times where you socialize and times where you maybe hibernate a bit more.
Perfect. Okay, cool. So yeah, if you're still watching this, lovely people, we're going to be putting together, collating a summary of everything that Hannah's been through, and we'll put that out in a bit of a PDF on the nutrition coaching side of the Virgin Active website. And if there's any other topics and things that you'd like us to cover, we're going to be doing one on nutrition and menopause next month too. But we'd love to hear from you in terms of topics. So, you know, follow us on social media, comment, and then hopefully we can bring a key topic that you love to another live, get another great expert on like Hannah. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed it.